So you want to start or
Yeah, just to recapitulate, we begin with this
how long do you
Fowler and
want to
Žižek.
go? How long would you want to go? An hour or something?
I would say an hour and 15 minutes or something like that. Well,
Okay.
like the second one we did on the introduction.
Okay.
Yeah, but let's just go with the flow
Just see.
but
See
I
how
guess this one will be shorter than the last one for sure.
Yeah, the last one was
The
really
crucis, as you said.
the Calvary of
Yeah.
philosophy. But um, you need to recapitulate, or we just start?
Yeah, just make sure with this, because now we don't have like this fixed structure like a
No,
book.
no. But we
So
had
we
a little.
begin with this Fowler Žižek, kind of the first sense of interpassivity, and
Did you see
then
the mail that I sent you?
yeah, I was going to ask you in which in which theme you want to discuss this, because they're really nice.
Maybe just in the end or something.
But yeah, what about it? You mean this veiled face?
I don't know yet, but let's see how we will.
Okay.
I just wanted to show you because if I talk about them, then you know how they look, because otherwise this Fernand Knopf painting, for example, and this. So I thought just if I want to talk about them, let's see. But then you know how they look, and I'm just also curious what you would say about it. But I will maybe introduce them
Okay.
then or something, and then we can just improvise a little bit. Anyhow, I was also just thinking that what we are doing ourselves is also sort of interpassive endeavor, no? But then at the same time, it gets always more and more passive, as we have always less and less viewers. Or would you say that its true interpassivity is proven by the less viewers we have? Because if they would really, right?
Because then no one really listens.
Exactly. As long as they really don't listen or don't watch, we are sure of its interpassive action. No? But okay, let's start. I think, as we said before, so, okay, I have to start with maybe say hello, no? That's always a... So hello again. Here we are again with Spirit is a Bone. I think today is the 4th episode already. We keep on going. That's a good or a bad sign. Anyhow, I'm again in the company of Luís Neiva. Very happy to see you, and also welcome to all our listeners who, as we just said, become always more and more interpassively engaged, which will be clear, I think, in the episode, what that exactly means through this episode. And as I think, Luís, you said in the end of the previous episode, today we are making a sort of intermezzo. It's a sort of excursus. We are not continuing directly engaging with the sublime object of ideology as we did the 3 previous episodes. So it's a moment for everybody to relax a little bit, to get into a little bit more entertainment after, as I said last time, this calvary of critical theory with Slavoj Žižek. Today we take out one little element that we have been touched upon last time, namely what is called this very interesting and very complex and very, let's say, ambiguous maybe notion of interpassivity. And as I think was a little bit clear from last episode, this is something that has been touched upon already by Jacques Lacan in one of his seminars. I think it's seminar 11 or seminar 7. I'm even
Seven.
not. I
Seven.
think it's 7. So there we go again with our doubts about which seminar. When we talked last time also about the Greek chorus in the Greek tragic theater, but Lacan just gives examples of what would be later called interpassivity, and then the fact that it is an interpassive, let's say, mechanism was in fact truly recognized by Slavoj Žižek in his first book, in the Sublime Object of Ideology. But the interesting thing is that Žižek himself didn't call it yet interpassivity. He just mentions the mechanism. And it is only through another scholar, a young theorist in the 80s, beginning of the 90s, called Robert Pfaller, an Austrian philosopher, that this, I would say, this concept of interpassivity would get its true, its true recognition and its true, engaging power, you could say, and in fact, today we want to unpack this notion of interpassivity. We think it's also a very relevant concept for not only for philosophy in general, but also for the arts, for performance arts, for cultural studies in general. I think we have with the notion of interpassivity, we tackle the whole complexity of what it means to be active, what it means to be passive, what it would mean to engage in an experience of what sort, in fact, whatever. This can be a daily experience. This can be the experience of an artwork. Maybe it's even about experience in general. Maybe it's even about the conditions of experience. And interpassivity is like one of these signifiers, one of these concepts that maybe are even too big for their own good or something, in this sense that the moment you start to unpack them, this becomes a sort of opening a Pandora's box, I think. And I have the feeling that the last week that we have been trying to prepare for this episode has been a little bit, again, drowning into a complex and multifaceted monstrum, in fact, with which it's very hard to find a way out. It's rather that you dive or that you enter a maze from which you can, in fact, not really escape. And I have the feeling still to be inside of it on this very moment. I don't know how that's with you, Luís. I didn't say yet a lot about interpassivity. Maybe just to open a little bit the floor also to Luís, to what you have to say about it. I think basically what Pfaller is always claiming is that the rise of this concept of interpassivity came from a very practical context, namely the fact that he was a philosopher in an art school, I think in Linz or something, somewhere in more in the province in Austria, and that this was, I think we are at that moment in the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. Maybe many people don't recall that anymore, but this was a time where, in general, let's say, classical art was going through a huge crisis, and in theater studies, in performance arts, think of all these ideas of how you call that, like these happenings and so on, that were let's say invented from the 70s on. There was this crisis of the role of the public, I think. And so what Pfaller said is that interpassivity was a reaction to a notion of interactive art. Interactivity became a little bit fashionable word from the 70s on, 70s, 80s, to so-called get rid of the passive status of the public in general, of the passive consumer. This idea that we are all consumerist people who passively enjoy things. And from a sort of naive point of view, interpassivity was this mechanism to deconstruct our passive engagement in the world in general, I think. Because the idea was, in fact, in a very naive way, to make the public actively engaged in an artwork, in the sense of that they would somehow complete it, that they would be in the midst of it, that they would find sometimes themselves in the midst of it, that the boundaries between who is doing the artwork, who is making the artwork, and who is consuming it, or who is, let's say, who is the receptor of this artwork, that this would break down. And then, in fact, you see that in the 80s, the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, a new sort of, maybe, is this a postmodern move? Then you feel that there is, that people start to getting problems with this concept. They see the pitfalls of this interactivity. And that's the moment when I think, in order to a little bit also to come to the rescue of a lot of students who, I remember Robert Pfaller saying that the students continuously had the idea that they were obliged to make their own artworks, that they were creating interactive. And so to come to the rescue to that, he problematized this notion of interactivity, which became almost like part of common art ideology. He came with that idea, but what if we would think the other side of interactivity, and that he called then, or he coined that as interpassivity. I didn't say yet what it exactly is, but I think this is maybe already giving some idea of what kind of dynamics that are playing here.
Yeah, and also what's since yet without revealing too much about the term, but it is fascinating that Pfaller publishes the first article on interpassivity, I think in '96, if I'm not mistaken, and then Žižek takes it. He applies Lacanian psychoanalysis to it, because Pfaller is mostly an Althusserian, so there's already this very big difference in approach. And then Pfaller takes back the term and develops it on top of what Žižek says. And it's amazing how this term has been growing in dimensions. First from local, as you said, a local response to a specific trend in contemporary art. And then, as we will see, maybe to something much more universal or much more undeniable, almost always present. And it's quite interesting to see how this concept just began first avant la lettre with Lacan and Žižek, of course, in '99 with the Sublime Object. Then it takes a kind of turn to a specific trend in contemporary art, and then psychoanalysis comes back to the term, and then Pfaller and Žižek have been, I think, and also with Mladen Dolar, have been kind of talking through this concept and just developing it in a manner that is really, really impressive. And I think we will talk about it more, how the very term of interpassivity can actually have more than one definition. And this is, I think, fascinating. But maybe it's time that we spoil the surprise and we define what interpassivity really is. And I would say the first obvious definition would say something like it is the delegation of enjoyment, allowing another one to enjoy in my place. I don't know if from this you want to say something.
Yeah, I'm thinking that this is of course true, but this is already very complex, because what would that mean to
Yeah.
to to um, to delegate enjoyment? Um, I would even think we need to still stay more close to what it means to be interactive first. I think that if you in the basic idea of Pfaller, that interpassivity is a reaction on interactivity. Maybe it's good to start first to understand
Yeah.
what it means to be interactive. I think for everybody, for us too, I think interactivity is a much less complex concept, because people are active and we are also active with them. Let's say that's what it means. It's like you are. There is a presupposition of passivity. Let's say you are a spectator of an art performance. To talk about this context of art, maybe it's the most easy, but it can also a political event and so on. And then interactivity would mean that you would actively engage in it. And I think that if you look, for example, at the computer devices we have since let's say 2000, more or less, since the 21st century, you see that also in video games and so on, all these kind of subcultures thrive on interactivity. This idea that we would not just sit in front of a screen and passively consume something, that we would just be the passive consumers of something, but that we would change into active consumers, let's say, or active. So of course, the interesting thing is, I think this is already in what we will develop later also, is that the whole problem with interactivity is that it somehow presumes that it knows, or that we know, or that people who are engaged in whatever you can think of, this can be sitting in front of a television, going to a theater piece, being in a meeting with other people, that when you don't say anything, when you are just, let's say, listening, or you are receptive to what's going on in front of you, that you would be passive. I think that's already the first presumption that is included in this problem. And because there is this passivity, this presumed passivity there, we need interactivity. And that's how this whole, I think in the next episode, we will talk about a sort of maybe a sister concept, or a concept that's very near to it, is the concept of immediacy. And I think if you, for example, if interpassivity today is much less something that is seems to be relevant, if you think of how today's museums, for example, and art events stress the notion of immersive engagement, participation, and so on, active listeners' participation, or publical participation. I think this is, you can say, this is in the legacy of interactivity and interpassivity. It's quite strange, in fact. Also, I think that's why we also wanted to do this episode on interpassivity, because I think both of you, Luís, and also myself, I think we both have this feeling that we are still in an era of interactivity, and immersive experiences and so on are in fact still part of that. And we find it both, I think, strange that this notion of interpassivity, which is really one of the most accurate and adequate ways of tackling and deconstructing this notion of interactivity, that it has in fact still gained so little attention. No, I think you can say in general that even in art theories and so on, in sociological theories, even in theories on historical practices, where you have this, like, let's say, in religious studies on processions and liturgies, and the birth of theater and so on, and all these ideas of practices, that even there the notion of interpassivity gets very little attention. So anyhow, I think that's the basic thing. So Pfaller was looking for the opposite notion. So what would it mean? As you said already before, there is this element of enjoying. I think you could also say of consumption, something that is passively, because that's what it means. Interpassivity as a reaction on interactivity would mean that not only activity becomes changed into passivity, but it would mean most of all that the ones that are, let's say, doing it in our place, that they not only do it actively in our place, but that they also at the same time, and this is quite complex, that they at the same time are passive in our place, which would mean they would be not only doing something, but they would be at the same time be the receivers of what they are doing. Maybe just one very stupid example to make that clear. When I go to the supermarket and I buy a product, a commodity, whatever, cornflakes, often you see on the package a kid with a spoon in the hand, and eventually the milk drips from his face or from his mouth, and there is a slogan like "Oh, so nice" or "Oh, so great." You could say that this is a very typical interpassive intervention, where my free choice, so-called, of what I want to buy in a supermarket is mediated by the package itself that enjoys in my place. So I would buy then eventually these cornflakes with this interpassive slogan, exactly because it has this interpassive slogan, because it mediates my enjoyment, it enjoys in my place, it consumes already, in fact, in my place, and it helps me to make my choice. In fact, I think that's something we will still touch upon. There is this moment, because the whole problem is, why would there be suddenly an instance, and I think you will for sure want to say more about that. Why would there be, in the first place, an instance between me and the thing that I want to engage with that would somehow would like to mediate my enjoyment, my consumption, and maybe the problem of enjoyment in general, like of being capable of enjoying something. So I don't know, maybe you want to still put it first in another direction, but I think generally, well, we stumble already upon some features of what this notion of interpassivity could mean.
Yeah, and it works kind of in two different levels at the same time, which is and we talked about it this past week, and also in the past episode when we were discussing this idea of objective belief, is that this concept also works, as you said, that this kid on the cereal box, or the most classical example that Žižek brings, which is the canned laughter, this recovered laughter that you hear on modern sitcoms. So it is already clear that interpassivity as a concept is relatively new, but as an event has been happening throughout a long period of human history, since the Greek choir, as we talked about it, until the more modern sitcoms. But what I was going to say is that this kid, at the same time, is of course seeming to consume the cereals and to enjoy the cereals in our place, and also it kind of tells us also how are we supposed to react to it. The same thing with canned laughter. It kind of marks or punctuates the places where we are supposed to laugh. Now, if this results in ourselves laughing or not, it's something that we will see just now. But it is, I think, important to stress that this concept works at a level of meaning construction. So advertising is exactly that, no? And at a level of enjoyment. And both things kind of happen at the same time. Of course, enjoyment is a much more, I would say, primordial reaction. but the meaning in the sense of something that we establish to a specific event, and religion is completely is a very obvious thing at how that happens. Every time we pray, every time we do these rituals like lighting a candle, it is through a mediated community, let's call it like this, that we can say that this candle means something in this specific context. So lighting a candle in a church is not the same as lighting a candle at home when the lights go out. It is through the community, through the context where we are in, through the other of this context, that we know exactly, or we suppose, it's better like this, we suppose the meaning of that gesture. And now comes the question: if the other enjoys in our place, do we enjoy it? Do we enjoy with the other, or is it some sort of excuse or lack of obligation not to enjoy?
Should we not start with giving some more examples of what interpassivity really is, like the examples that Pfaller is giving, the examples that Žižek gives, and then also the examples that in a further article that we also were engaging with, Mladen Dolar was giving. Because I think also that the authors, or let's say the thinkers of the concept of interpassivity, that they discovered through their examples that there are several layers in interpassivity, or there are different ways of, I think you pointed already about this idea of the candle, that, for example, you talked about canned laughter. Canned laughter is clearly another way of being interpassively engaged than when you would light a candle, and the candle would somehow, as Žižek and Pfaller are saying, the candle prays for you. There is this very famous example of the Buddhist praying wheel that would pray. You would put a message there, or how is it going, and then the wheel prays in your place. And there are other things. No, I think one of the also very famous examples they recall is the weepers, the mourners in traditional society, who would weep in your place. So that's the funny part of it, because I think we didn't yet talk about that, but there is absolutely a comical element in interpassivity. I think it's linked to comedy and to the comical condition of our let's say human condition also. Like there is something of that absolutely pointed at in this mechanism of interpassivity. There is something absurd in it, I would dare to say. So, but for example, these mourners that lament or that sing and cry on a funeral, so that we can be busy with the legacy or the testament or something, like that we can do just the practical stuff, and we don't have to engage ourselves in any kind of emotional participation. So it exempts us. This outsourcing of our emotions on such an occasion like a funeral would exempt us, as mostly Žižek says, to do other things, to do more important things, or to, what he also sometimes says, to go on with daily life. No, but this would still somehow presume that you could easily cry on a funeral, but you have better things to do. It's almost a sort of functionalism that is there, and therefore it's a nice mechanism. You can also say, and that's this whole ambiguity where we talked already about in the beginning, that there is also another notion, namely the problem of that everybody has experienced already, is how do I properly behave when a family member dies and I'm in a funeral, and for example I can't cry, I have no tears, and it feels like inappropriate. So you can say that in traditional societies they have a sort of they anticipate this problem, and they have mechanisms to escape the embarrassment of having no tears on a funeral by letting professionals do it in our place. So I think in this interpretation, interpassivity doesn't mean we have better things to do, and therefore we outsource them by professionals that do it in our place. In this sense, also that crying is seen as a passive reception of the fact that somebody dies. But it could also mean that we are in fact in this impossibility of experiencing something. I think interpassivity, and that's absolutely also the emancipatory element of it, for sure, in this first stage of discovery of it, is that it shows, in fact, it lays bare, in fact, this problem of experience in general. What is experience, and also what you were saying before, like we need to enjoy. There is this the society puts on us this necessity and this imperative of enjoy. You have to enjoy, you have to have pleasures. But what if you can't have them? What if you cannot, if you experience nothing, if there is nothing to enjoy? And
I would say that just even more than that, even this order that society gives you, that you have to enjoy, is in itself, it has the opposite effect. It creates an impossibility of enjoyment. As Žižek says, I think it's also in an article he wrote called Interpassive Subjects. It's like imagining this father who goes to vacation with his kids, and he has a lot of trouble with packing everything, with booking the flights, booking the hotels, packing up the car. Everything is work. Everything is tough to deal with. And at the end, he just says to the kids and to his wife, "Now you better enjoy it." And this is, I think, this impossibility that you were talking about, that in these situations or in these contexts that you actually need to enjoy, then enjoyment becomes impossible.
The traditional notion of psychoanalysis is that because of some inner obstacles, you internalized, identified excessively with paternal or other social prohibitions, you cannot set yourself free to enjoy. Pleasure is not accessible for you. It is accessible to you only in pathological forms of feeling guilty and so on. So then the idea is psychoanalysis allows you to suspend, overcome these internalized prohibitions so that it enables you to enjoy. The problem today is that the commandment of the ruling ideology is enjoy in different ways. It can be sexual enjoyment, consumption, commodity enjoyment, up to spiritual enjoyment, realize yourself, whatever. And I think that the problem today is not how to get rid of your inhibitions and to be able to spontaneously enjoy. The problem is how to get rid of this injunction to enjoy.
In this kind of circumstances, it's clear that interpassivity is a way of sabotaging this
Exactly.
This imperative or this superego injunction to enjoy, and interpassivity can become a way of, well, this is then, I think, a question that you also asked already before, like, and we have to, I think, slowly engage to that. So, like, what's happening when we sabotage our own engagement? You can say, like, okay, this helps, this is a great thing. Like, I think you can say that canned laughter can also be understood in these two ways. As you said, it can be a way of telling from the film industry itself to tell us where to laugh, and there is this, like, what Lacan would call then the subject supposed to know. The sitcom knows where it's funny and tells us where we have to laugh. But at the same time, I think what Žižek points at is that we don't have to laugh at all, because the sitcom laughs in our place, and we can just quietly do something else, or eat something, or just be in front, just chill out in front of the television. And as Žižek also points at, this mechanism is that even if we haven't laughed at all, and the sitcom laughed itself in our place, we are somehow satisfied at the end. We are relaxed, and we had a good time. So I think this is another example that, and we know that from our family situations and so on, that, for example, a mother who cooks for her family and doesn't eat herself, but loves to see, stuffs the family members, and loves to enjoys the others enjoying her food. Or just in general, that parents want to, let's say, sacrifice and suffer for their kids because they love that they enjoy the enjoyment of their kids. When you love somebody, you delegate in a way your enjoyment to somebody else, and this enjoyment of the person you love, strangely enough, becomes in the end your enjoyment. So these are, let's say, very simple examples of how it seems to be almost naively clear that even if you don't enjoy directly, something can be
comes back to you.
can be taken up, or so okay, maybe do you still want to give other examples? I think there are these example of the scholar who is copying incessantly books in a university library. And then, of course, copying we don't do anymore, but we have now these things of downloading. I would say I have that myself also. I don't do anything else than downloading PDFs. With so I in the end, I get this massive library of thousands and thousands of PDFs, which I will never read. But somehow, and that's also very interesting, there is this element of obfuscation, of illusion, that somehow I fantasize that I will still read them one moment. And there is, so it's also clear, I think, that Pfaller also says that some interpassive actions bring pleasure, like canned laughter, where you somehow have a sort of enjoyment even if you didn't do anything. But some bring also displeasure and bring a certain suffering, like the suffering of the person who won't still read all the PDFs that he has downloaded and so on. And there is there a sort of obfuscation that your computer has read in your place somehow. So I think that mostly, I don't know if you agree, but I think mostly Pfaller is basically engaged in a sort of very precise and accurate analysis of all these obsessional neurotic phenomena of interpassivity. And as you said already before, I think this is the first stage of the phenomenon. No, that's like this discovery of the obsessional neurotic element of interpassivity. I don't know if
yes, and maybe to another classical example is something that is still ambiguous, but something we discussed also this week. The example of the clack, as Dolar says, this instance in theater that happened a lot also in Italy, I think, in the 19th century, of members of the audience were paid by producers to applaud during a show, to react to this show, and even almost undermining themselves and saying things like "out with the clack." So the point is that you never know where the clack begins and where it ends, and I think this speaks to this element of interpassivity as something that is not too precise, I would say, because you never know what is there enjoying for you. And of course, Dolar includes in this clack not only the people who are there reacting to the play and telling you where you're supposed to laugh or where you're supposed to applaud, where you are supposed to cry, but also even the advertising involved in the play, every social mechanism that makes you want to go to the play and creates some sort of expectation is already some part of this clack. So immediately we see here some sort of almost universal presence that hangs around this idea. And of course, here comes the question: if the clack is there is the clack there to allow you not to enjoy, or is it there to make you enjoy? And this is, I think, the difference between interactivity and interpassivity. I don't know if you have something on to say on that.
Yeah. I think this article of Mladen Dolar, which is some years after, I think it's even it's more recent, like 10 years old or something. It's a very nice upgrade of this whole interpassivity. This discussion around it. What I like a lot also in this article is that he says it's a sort of I think he calls it like the prehistory of interpassivity. He of course he refers also to the chorus but there people are on stage, so the chorus is the public on stage. But what he discovers somehow is that the fact that, as you also pointed out, that you are in the midst of a public that you have no idea if these people are paid or not. Is my neighbor, who is very enthusiastic about the play that you are looking at, is he genuinely enthusiastic? And what is that doing with my enthusiasm? I think once you understand this mechanism of la claque, as he calls it, as it historically also was called, is that it also points at the fact that we are always already, we are always already taken up into a broader experience. What we fantasize as being our personal choices, our personal deep experiences of something, are in fact always already mediated by things that we are even not aware of that they are there, and who are, let's say, engaging us interpassively in a way. I think the example that you give of reviews and critiques and comments, it's very common. Like, let's say you want to watch a new series online, and then you decide to see this or that series. In fact, often what you do is you go online and you start to check Rotten Tomatoes or another website where you can see the points, or you can, in fact, you mediate already without really being conscious about that, what you are going to see. And then the moment you decide to see this or that series, it's mostly a series which has been already watched and has been already approved, because that's the interpassive element, I think, has been already approved by an anonymous mass of other people. And this anonymous mass of other people that think in our place, this resonates with our previous episodes also, of course, that's this phenomenon of the claque indeed. And yeah, I think, of course, it shows also how our so-called authentic enjoyment has been always already mediated, and can never be proper. The moment you start to think about it, you start to discover that nothing is original there, that nothing is authentic there, and that and this, of course, so I would almost dare to say, I think this is part of the malaise of the modern subject, that the more you are getting aware of that, the less you are feeling well in society, the more you are understanding that enjoyment is always already hijacked by another enjoyment. There is this kind of doppelganger element also in it. No, another is stealing your enjoyment. You could, I think that's also the maybe the paranoiac element that is also lurking under. We had already the obsessional neurotic. I think there is also a perverse element there, but there is also a paranoiac element. Like I cannot experience authentically because somebody else is already vampirizing my on my behalf, so to speak. So that also plays with it. So we see already how vast the problematics of this concept is.
Yes, and this, I think, it touches also an important point, is that the one who enjoys is always supposed, is never there. And with the clock, it's very clear, as you said just now, that we don't know if our neighbor is really a member of the clock, or if he's really enjoying, or if he's just paid to do it. So something that is structural and that belongs in the very concept of illusion, as Pfaller would also, it is another term by Pfaller, it is illusion without subject, is the idea that the one who enjoys is never there. So this enjoyment is constantly, exactly, on the pleasure principle in culture, that this enjoyment is constantly decentered, that it is always of the other. But who this other is someone that can only be supposed, can only be imagined. And this, I think, is the crux of this mechanism.
Yeah, and now, of course, the question, I think, that you already also pointed out is like how to engage with it, how to escape it. Like, I think that it's clear that interpassivity is not just only an emancipatory mechanism, but that it can easily be engaged for prolongation of what it tries to escape from.
Yeah.
And that's of course very interesting. That I think that's also indeed what comes in the second part of the Mladen Dolar article, the one that I think is the enjoying machine or something it's called. As you said already before, in the beginning of the article, he shows very well that interpassivity can become. Why would you basically sabotage your own enjoyment? Why would you? And I think he points at another mechanism of the structure of the law in general, of general law in a society, namely that that enjoyment always works through prohibition. So the moment you discipline yourself, the moment you use this impossibility of being able to enjoy as a sort of self-disciplining instrument, what happens is that you somehow keep the dream or the fantasy alive of a sort of total satisfaction at the end of the line or something, like. So it's exactly by sacrificing your enjoyment and delegating, outsourcing to another instance, that you keep the desiring structure in the Lacanian way, like desire as something that is centered towards a lack, something that is missing, something that you never can get. You keep this structure, I think, very much alive. And well, this is what desire about. What it is about. It's like this thing that you are never satisfied, and so there is this element of continuous dissatisfaction, which is in fact played or instrumentalized by the subject itself, I think. I don't know if we would be able to give examples of that, or if it's clear, but I think this is a very common strategy behind this structure of outsourcing your enjoyment. And you see here the pitfall of it, I would say.
Yes, and it also points out how desire is always the desire of the other. It is always through the supposition or the imagination that the other achieves total satisfaction that we can keep safe and imagine that our desire is also has the potential to be completely satisfied. And of course, we know from psychoanalysis that this is impossible. That's why desire is always of the other. And this, I think, is one of the constitutive elements of this dynamic between interpassivity and interactivity, because interpassivity acts here as some sort of defense, or, as you said, emancipation to interactivity. So because I am never, if I am always active through the other, then I arrive at an impossible point. Basically, I arrive at a moment where I confront the impossibility of complete satisfaction. So interpassivity acts here as some sort of safekeeping to that satisfaction.
Yes, yes. But then, of course, I think Žižek does that in, well, let's say that I think we talked about that Pfaller is the one who, sociologically, I think the books of Pfaller are really well to get great examples of how this outsourced illusion works. No, how this interpassivity works on a sociological level, almost on the. He gives a lot of examples, but I think it stays on this level of what Dolar says. No, it stays a little bit on the level of this obsessional neurotic perspective. Yeah. I think both Žižek and Dolar then try to give examples of, try to break through that a little bit and try from two interconnected psychoanalytic angles to show how we would be able maybe to work through this problem of sabotaged satisfaction, maybe of sabotaged enjoyment, because I guess that both feel that the emancipatory potential of interpassivity is just not enough. It's like it in the first stage, it was a really nice way of trying to deconstruct the presumptions of interactivity. I think this is still very relevant, because if you look at contemporary museums, wherever you go, there is still this idea that the public needs to be entertained, needs to be activated, or their reception, their enjoyment needs to be somehow taken up, or they need to be engaged in a certain way. So I think this is still absolutely relevant, and even I think it's not because it's a concept that or a knife that cuts on two sides that it's as a concept irrelevant or should be dismissed. I think on the contrary, it shows its dialectical potential almost, I would say. But nevertheless, maybe we let's try to now, and I think this is not an easy domain, but let's try maybe to engage with how Dolar and Žižek see a way out, or see maybe something similar. I think first of all, Dolar sees a very big similarity in the psychoanalytic session. I think the relation between the analysant, let's say the patient, and the analyst, this relation is very similar to an interpassive situation or an interactive situation. Interpassive. I think you already pointed at that in the beginning, that when you go in analysis, there is this idea of the other that knows in your place, that knows your secret. Let's say that. Therefore, you trust this analyst, and you engage with him or her, and you engage with his analysis. Otherwise, it would not even work. So there is this moment of even sort of illusion, like that you, but then this is transformed. There is a transformation happening there, a working through. And I think Dolar sees what's happening there as a possibility to rethink what's happening in interpassivity. We will come back to that. We need to engage with that in detail. Just to go now quickly to Žižek. Žižek has another take on the same problem, I think. He tries rather to think a possibility to escape the deadlock of interpassivity through something that he took from Hegel, I think. This idea of reflexive determination, I think it's called. And on the other hand, the sexuation theory of Lacan, where he tries to compare two possible positions of being engaged. This is almost a sort of topological idea of being engaged in an interpassive relation. Although not, it's also a little bit mind-blowing, because although nothing, it's just a sort of reversal of positions, although nothing really changes, let's say, physically or something. So it's more a kind of change of, okay, maybe, what do you think? Should we start first with Dolar, how he sees that, maybe? Is that, or what?
I think the sexuation can be an interesting entry point into this contact or this integration that happens also in analysis. So maybe I can start. And Žižek has a very interesting example that introduces the two positions in Lacanian sexuation, and it is, of course, the male position and the female position. And he uses an example, a beer advertising.
Although I think we should really immediately say that this has nothing to do with biological positions. You can also interchange them with just two positions, which could be just point at a differential, at some kind of primordial difference. No, it's in fact the way, as in a very Lacanian way, we are oriented towards what Lacan would call the phallus. That's also a term which is highly contested and so on. But I think it's very important that the two positions have nothing to do with biological femininity or masculinity. It's just two positions which, but I interrupted. I think it's just important to make that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it is, in fact, something that is contested. But as you said, it is important to really stress that it has nothing to do with men, women in the, let's call it, sociological or biological sense. But they are used as an example, and I would say not completely in a contingent way. So Žižek talks about this beer advertising, which is basically the story of the famous story: a woman sees a frog, she kisses the frog, and the frog turns into this beautiful man. And immediately, the story doesn't end here. Immediately, the man kisses the woman, and the woman turns into a beer bottle. And Žižek has some kind of interesting twist to this story, and he explains the two sexuation positions in relationship to this story. So the male position is a position of basically reduction. So the man who reduces the woman to a fetishized object, to a particular aspect or a particular fetish of enjoyment. And this is the male position. The female position, on the other hand, is a position of universalization. It is a position where the woman on this story takes a frog and sees a universal, complete man behind this strange animal, while the man sees a particularized, fetishized object. And I would say here that's also relates to the reason why machismo or misogyny is not a complete symmetrical phenomenon or structure to feminism, because what misogyny does is basically to reduce the woman to a fetishized object. We often have this idea of either the mother or the sexual object. So it is this misogynistic position that it can never have the woman on its completion, and and especially on what it is not. There's always a fetishized particular obsession we have with this being. On the other hand, the feminist position is one of universalization and constant universalization in that regard. There's an interview by Judith Butler where she says that she gives a very interesting definition of feminism, which is feminism is saying always no when someone tries to define a woman. And this creates the opening that essentially characterizes the feminist or the female the sexuation position in Lacan.
Yeah, that's interesting, and also it just in a very general way now, that because maybe not all listeners know that, but in the Lacanian theory in general, maybe the idea of substitution is essential. I mean, it means that what the subject means in Lacanian theory is not this self-identifying ego that knows what it is and can make free choices in the world. The subject is exactly that, what, as Lacan said, has to be represented by a signifier for another signifier, he says. No, so but there is this element of substitution as the core of the subject, in fact. So the subject is not something that can be thought alone. It needs to be substituted by something. And interesting is also that because this substitution always fails, the signifier is never, I think this resonates with what you just were saying, we need another element. We need something else of our, let's say, the illusion is that it's of our proper choice, or it's something that appears to us as something we have to engage with, and which Lacan calls then the object. So it's a phantasmatic substitution. You have a sort of more regulated substitute, that's the signifier, and then you have this phantasmatic substitute, the objet. And as in what you also were talking about, a nice example of this woman that becomes then this beer and so on. This would be an example also of the typical male sexuation, where there is always an objet to be found. People are always on the lookout. This is also this dynamic of never being satisfied and always looking for the thing that would bear the deep secret, which then always has to fail, and so on. This. Indeed, I think, and that brings us then nicely to what Mladen Dolar is talking about. He sees then this other structure, what you would call then the feminist position, would be then the structure of the drive. The first structure, what Dolar calls rather interactive. It's also this continuous activity. This sounds also like perversion, no? Like the idea that we have to be active in order to satisfy the other or something. While in interpassivity, true interpassivity, if something like that would be eventually possible, it has to take up the structure of the drive. And this is now we go deep into already, let's say, Lacanian theory, but it's quite interesting to nevertheless try to unpack that a little bit. I think it's basically that we talked already about desire and desire structures. We are subjects of desire. There's always the desire of the other and so on. But underneath, let's say, or parallel with that, there is something else going on. And that's what is called in Lacanian theory the drive. And I think both Žižek and Mladen Dolar see a possibility eventually to escape from this deadlock of interpassivity in the bad sense, let's say, called as interactivity then. Let's not make it too complicated or too confusing, but through this idea of the drive. And I said already before, I think the analyse itself, the psychoanalytic treatment itself could be a nice example of this idea of the drive. It means that, but maybe you can explain that better even, but in general, it means that slowly the person that you have delegated all your thrusts and all your beliefs and so on, the one that knows, the analyst, the one that you trust to help you in this treatment, whatever it means, in fact, slowly fades away almost as this subject of knowledge, the subject supposed to know, as Lacan calls it. And this takes sometimes months, sometimes years. And slowly you start to understand that, well, as Lacan also really nicely says, this other, who is like the stand-in, this analyst is the stand-in for the big other also doesn't know. So there is nothing to rely upon. In fact, there is no outsourcing really possible, because the other also doesn't really enjoy, you can say. The other is also a lacking being, just like yourself. And this somehow, and this is very hard to think, but I think it's interesting, this somehow lays bare the structure of the drive. I think Mladen Dolar gives, and then I would like that you, Luís, try to explain it even better, but there is a nice example of this difference between desire and drive given by Mladen Dolar in this text. For people who want to dive more into that, it's a text that combines it all, interpassivity and the desire drive structure. The problem is, for example, when we eat, what is on the level of desire would be the food. But the food touching the mouth, people that smoke know this satisfaction also. There is a fact that you need to always go back to smoke because you are never satisfied. Your desire is never satisfied. But at the same time, something gets satisfied. That is namely the touching of the cigarette or whatever on the mouth, on the edge of the organ of the drive, no? And this has a sort of repetition structure. So therefore, also Lacan says that the drive is always, let's say, defined by repetition structure. And so we need to get on that level, let's say. We need to be aware. We get slowly aware in analysis of this level of the drive. And we get suddenly aware of the symptoms that are appearing there almost in their more naked states than when they are covered up by our fantasies, by our objects that we create in order to not get satisfied, let's say. But maybe you can still explain it better and then bring it to this idea of what would that then mean for this experience in interpassivity.
Yes, it is with analysis. You're right. So analysis, particularly the Lacanian one, begins with the supposition that people don't really want to get better. They just want to engage in their common symptoms. The reason they go to analysis is maybe those symptoms became too problematic in their daily life. So when they go to analysis, what they really want is just to solve the extra trouble they have in the day-to-day life and just go back to following the symptom. So the role of the analyst here is to basically embody the other who knows, which is I would say, the main symptom that we all go through. And to do this, what the analyst does is that he hides himself in some sort of a wall or a curtain of meaning, in the sense that he's always vague and ambiguous in his reactions. He remains silent. And this is not a position of, it's not like an authoritarian position. It is a position that actually creates knowledge. This subject is supposed to know, because it remains always hidden. It creates an anxious response on the analysand. And through this, or on top of this silence, we try to paste some sort of supposed answers. And this is how basically the analytic process begins. And this is the fundamental stage in the beginning of analysis. So slowly, what the analyst does is that it sabotages this position. It allows the analysand to really understand that him, the analyst, also doesn't know. And what this creates is, as you said, at the end of analysis, is a recognition that mediation is absolute. Is that it is unsurpassable. It is the idea that the other also does not know. And maybe here we can, of course, give the example of religion, also relating to these two sexuation positions. Richard Boothby has a really interesting book called Embracing the Void. And by the end of the book, he establishes Christianity according to these two positions. So the male position would be the position of the other knows. So Christianity, on this idea of Christ on the cross, what it creates is a human being without sin. And this human being without sin is the other who knows, is the other who has access to complete and substantial meaning and existence. So from this position, all other human beings are somehow hierarchized, so that everyone is always not like Christ, because everyone sins in somehow. And this is the common way of perceiving Christianity. What the female sexuation position and what is actually described by a lot of the mystics in the Middle Ages, in the Renaissance, is that, well, Christianity reveals actually a kernel of atheism by announcing Christ as God dead on the cross. And this is what is called a kenosis, a voiding of God. So by creating Christ not as a fetish object, not as a perfect, substantial human being, it creates Christ as a devoided, banal version of God. And this is true universality, because we all recognize this split, this void in ourselves. And the moment we recognize it also on the divinity, this is the moment that Lacan would call the end of analysis, is to really understand that this lack, this not knowing, is universal. And this is the point that Mladen Dolar says, that interpassivity in this sense is always there. It is the recognition that mediation is absolute and universal.
Yes, that's interesting. This idea that in the end there is a sort of recognition of mediation as the fact that that there is not that it's not about getting to an immediate, that the end of the absolute experience, whatever you want to call it, is an experience of something immediate, but that it's exact about sort of pure mediation or something like.
Yeah.
I think there are artworks that, let's say, maybe if it's a good artwork, if it's worthy of its name as artwork, I think they always have this element to tackle or mediate in themselves this problem of interpassivity. And my first example, it's a painting from Fernand Knopf that I have it here as a postcard. I bought it in the Brussels Museum of Fine Arts. It's where it hangs. Fernand Knopf is one of these Belgian painters from the late 19th, beginning of the 20th century, symbolistic and so on. And he has this very interesting, it's I think one of my favorite paintings. And in fact, it's through the notion of interpassivity, through diving more deep into what this interpassivity in fact is, that I also got to understand better what attracts me exactly in this painting. And I don't know, I would like to hear your comment on that. I will just give you some little elements that I think are for me very important, and I would love to hear your comment. But what is so interesting on this painting, so first of all, Knopf calls this painting En écoutant Schumann. So it's a painting about music, first of all. This is already very interesting because it talks about something that is structurally absent in a painting, because a painting cannot paint music as far as I know. So there is already like this problem of how can we experience what the painting tries to make us participate in. That's already very interesting. But then in two ways this is doubled in the depiction, in the representation itself of the painting. First of all, one could say it's doubled by the fact that we don't see the pianist playing. We see only his hand. Completely in the left, we see just like almost as a sort of partial object. It has also maybe this idea of the objet there. There is this hand of the pianist, and we fantasize that, well, that's the hand that plays then this Schumann. But of course, there is then the receptive, the consuming, the enjoying element. That's en écoutant, which means, and while listening, Schumann, which is this act of enjoying. And then the enjoying subject is there in the middle of the painting, is the subject of the painting, one would say. She sits there in the sofa. It's the mother, apparently, of Fernand Knopf, but she's hiding her face. So she's not only not looking in the camera, she by the way, she makes this gesture that many people do when they are photographed. You know, they don't like to be photographed. They hide their face, and you have this kind of like bad photo. No, when you delete them mostly on your phone. When you have people hiding their face, you keep the ones where you see the face. So, but this is a painting, of course. So this is a deliberate process of painting someone who is hiding her face, and so she repeats in a strange way this impossibility of us not being able to hear, to participate, to enjoy. So it's not only that we don't enjoy Schumann, but we also enjoy or don't enjoy a person who is not enjoying, or we don't know if she enjoys. Maybe even more important is not that she's not enjoying, but it's clear that we don't, as in a typical interpassive painting, one would say, one would see some tears, one would see somebody with gestures of affection, and we would then feel the consumption of what happens. Here we don't have any idea, and I would think, we have a sort of missing element here, and I think this is why this painting is so, in a weird way, satisfactory and enjoyable. Is it because it sabotages in this very double way? It sabotages not just interpassively, but it creates what I think Žižek and Mladen Dolar would call the drive structure of interpassivity. I don't know what you have to say on that. I don't know if you agree or if you see what I try to.
Yeah, I you showed me the painting, and it is quite interesting that she hides her reaction, and this is what we already talked about, this structural or constitutive decentering of enjoyment, that it works more if you do not know if the other is really enjoying. So it's a bit like the claque that we talked about. So this idea that, of course, she's with her face being hid, so it some sort of suggests that she's focusing on the music, but we can only suppose.
Yeah, but I think also that she cannot function like the claque because she's exactly not in a state of giving us any kind of. She doesn't mediate anything. That's the whole point. She avoids mediation, and the claque is always a sort of unconscious, a mediator. Here we are on another level. We are not on the level of desire, where we would be eventually satisfied,
Yeah,
or we
precisely.
would not gain. And it's not, weirdly enough, because the other is, let's say, split or decentered, or we find almost, I would almost dare to say, we find a weird drive satisfaction here. By this missing signifier, almost. It's the missing signifier. It's the strategy of the painter, who, because you know that this is a cliché-matic painting you have from James Ensor, de Braquelaire, and also French painters and Italian painters of the same time. This is a topos, listening to a person playing piano. Often it's a man or a woman on the piano, and the other person through whom we get to look at the person who is playing. It's mostly a person who watches the pianist, and who is engaged in you see mostly satisfaction on the face, or you see concentration. But here, of course, you can say it's a painting that wants to paint the inward experience of the lady. Probably that would be an interpretation. It would also show how she is disconnected. This is the opposite of what you would call Gebrauchsmusik, or this is a total Proustian inward experience. There is a clear, let's say, disconnection there, and we have no idea what's going on. And I think it's exactly this element.
I would argue that is true interpassivity, because the clock as an element of interactivity, because it makes you want to react in the same way. The clock is there for the audience to know also to react. So by hiding the reaction, this is, as you said, this is the true interpassivity, of course, of the drive, because it doesn't make you act directly in the emotion, because the emotion is not clear. If it's disgust or happiness or sadness, we don't know. And because it hides, it then allows us to fill in the gaps. This is basically I think the constitutive element here, because with the clock, of course, the clock is mostly, or at least it has the intention of being interactive. It has the intention of provoking a reaction. There is the opposite.
Yeah, and my second example is almost going much more back in history. It's these famous statues of what they call in French pleurants, or mourners. This links, of course, to the example of Žižek and Pfaller of hired or professional mourners that are in very ritualistic or very codified or coded societies. You have these professionals that. But what I find very interesting here is that Klaus Sluter, the artist, I think one of the first who let's say completely exploited this art of drapery, of sculpting drapery in such an incredible virtuosic way, exploited in a very smart way, and it is somehow similar to what would happen in the 19th century with Knopf and so on. The fact that something needs, in order to really enjoy in a non-interactive way, or in a in a way that we would feel still dissatisfied, he hides the tears, and he creates statues of mourners, of which you have no idea what's going on with them. And so they of course, because we recognize these kind of clothes, we know that they are somehow mourning, but we have no idea what they really stand for. I think this is what you said about your example with your frog and so on. There is this element of universality, the universality of sadness, the universality of mourning, but without giving in to any kind of. This is truly passive in its true sense. Like it's a total disconnection of any any kind of consumption in the cliche way. So what fascinates me is that people in the 15th century. I think we have examples from the chorus, which is then, but there in the chorus, of course, they really articulate their sadness and so on, and they do it in our place. Here they open, I would say, a space for our drive satisfaction, because they are in a way, it's an interpassive. They are it's like the cornflakes boy or girl who is there saying, oh, this is so nice. These are people who also stand in the place of our sorrow or our sadness, or they make it palpable for us, but at the same time they include a sort of what you said before, this decentering element. And I think this is a very, very smart way, and I would say this points at the greatness of why it's great art. I would say because it has this capacity of bringing in us up the problem of enjoyment itself, almost. I don't know if that makes sense.
I was thinking that it also changes on the person who receives, because I'm imagining it is also possible to approach this image of the mourners, and even the one we analyzed before, as a position of or similar to the subject supposed to know, or to the analyst, in the sense that the veil in the face of the mourner can actually stand in for an idealized, complete, substantial sadness. No? So in a way, it can create this position of a substantial subject. So how would you say here that this position gets undermined or sabotaged?
Well, I think it's exactly because by not showing it, I think if it would have, it's what you said. I think the example of the analyst is very interesting. It's like is that you are in the same way, nothing changes with the analyst, but slowly your position towards the analyst changes. So and I would think that's also what happens with this. You would almost say that in the end, there is a sort of the substantial element will make place for subject in a sort of Hegelian from substance to subject. I think in the end, it's maybe very interesting also that there is one composer in the Renaissance, Josquin Desprez, who has written a lamentation for the death of a colleague. It's called Nymphe des Bois, where he evokes these clothes of these mourners. He says to the colleagues, to his colleagues of polyphonic art, he names their name in the piece. So when you perform the piece, you have to sing these people's name, and you have to tell them to wear such habits de deuil. It is clothes of sadness, of mourning. And very interesting also is that Josquin not only repeats, or makes a sort of is reminiscent of what we see, what happens here in these Slüter draperies, but also that what he does in his piece is itself a strategy of this interpassivity. Why? Because what he does is it's not a direct mourning. In fact, 5 singers have to sing the piece, but the piece is in itself a kind of invocation of nymphs to mourn the person that is evoked in the piece, this other composer that died. So this is a very interesting, weird substitution that happens here, and I think it points.
Yes, and just let me add that Josquin adds his own name to this group of colleagues. So almost of course, the poem is not by Josquin, but the fact that in his piece he still includes his own name as if it was of the other.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that all these examples somehow show how through interpassivity, through this phenomenon of interpassivity that we in fact encounter, if you start to dig, you find it everywhere. And you start to, you can even start to understand art from this perspective, from all these dimensions of, you can even, I would almost, would it not be possible even to, that was a little bit my idea, that would it be possible to, with the tool of interpassivity, to make a sort of judgment of good and workable art, and art that really gets to the core of what it's, of what it means to be an artwork, like escaping from a sort of aesthetical notion of judgment of art. Like, is there something in interpassivity, the idea that it's a strategy of what Žižek also would call primordial substitution, that it in fact tackles and tarries with our own primordial substitution as subjects, that art that engages with that and the smarter it does that, the more somehow we get to a level of satisfaction, which at the same time, I would almost dare to say, is a sort of unfuckable satisfaction. It's satisfaction that escapes, that goes beyond the pleasure principle, to talk with Freud, and escapes this kind of like, the satisfaction that is bombarding us daily, and by which we can become desiring subjects at best, but nevertheless will always give us this kind of pacifying, unsatisfactory feel with which we in fact navigate through our daily life. And well, I think this is a function of art still to be discovered. I don't know if we have just maybe just opened a little bit of the potentiality of that. Well, I don't know if you still have to end with something.
Yeah, I was just, because I was now thinking, of course, we both know this piece of Josquin quite well, and I was trying to compare it with the mourner, the picture, the painting of the mourner or of the woman listening to music, and it is quite interesting that music reveals. Yes, exactly. That music has these, of course, it has this time element that the painting has not. As Da Vinci says, music is the thing that dies in the moment it is born. And it is quite fascinating that in the case of the mourner, I can actually have two positions. I can have the position of the one who, because I don't see the one crying, I can suppose an absolute transcendental substantial crying, or I can, for the same reason, identify in this mourner someone who also lacks, or someone who also doesn't know. But this is a change, I would say, in the receptor, in the one who kind of experiences the work of art. And on the other hand, with the Josquin song, and there's, of course, the song has two main parts, and the first part is in 5 voices, the second part is in 4 voices. And in the first part, there's a cantus firmus, or a plain chant melody that unites the entire section, and this melody is actually
reminiscent. It's the clack, baby.
Exactly. Yeah, because it is the melody, the plain chant melody, the old melody of the requiem, of the mass for the dead. And it is also very important to the one who died, because Oxygen, to whom this song is dedicated, composed one of the first requiem polyphonic masses using exactly this melody. So in the first melody, the entire polyphonic structure is somehow stitched around this melody. And in the second moment, this, maybe I would call it a subject supposed to know, goes away. And we stay only with these 4 composers, the 4 students of Oxygen, crying because they lost their father. So maybe this entire song can be thought as a session of, or a process of analysis. No, because we begin with the subject supposed to know. We begin with this tradition that comes from centuries before of a melody who is there to show how the entire polyphonic structure has to be structured or composed. And the moment it goes away, we remain only with mediated sadness. We remain only with this acceptance of lack, of loss. And it is, I would say, in this paragone of arts, I would say it's a point more for music, because it can really show this process on time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see what you mean. It's also the parallel between maybe the hand that is covered, or the piano hand, and then the absent voice, the voice that which is only which can be which is subtracted from the thing, and can be not really heard because it's not there, but it's somehow evoked in its absence.
Yes,
because it's suddenly away in a way, like so, and there is this absolutely. No, I think this is a wonderful analysis, and it points also at the incredible potential, I think, for critical theory and psychoanalysis to be applied to art and musical genres and forms that seem very distant from us, and that nevertheless seem at the same time being constructed and conceived through the same kind of like ahistorical and sort of universalizing notions of impossibility, absence, and what you say, lack or loss.
Yeah.